how many days before there is a massive backbench Labour revolt? So previously, the Prime Minister has said stuff like this.
Been totally irresponsible. They know, we know, that benefits should be increased in line with inflation.
Yeah, and then today it looks like the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is going to slash benefits. Now, I think that's actually quite a good thing, but I bet loads of Labour MPs certainly don't. Labour MPs already revolted over the two-child benefit cap. He lost 7 of them, like Zara Sultana.
My constituency of Coventry South, 10,000 children live in poverty. That's 1 in 3 children. When I'm talking to parents and I'm talking to teachers, when I'm volunteering at the food bank, I am hearing these stories of kids who are going to sleep hungry at night. They are going to school learning on an empty stomach. They are returning to cold homes. They are missing out on experiences that every child should enjoy.
So now, Starmer's going to ask Labour MPs to back the benefits cuts, is he? Today, 40 Labour MPs revolted over the farmers' death tax that Starmer and Reeves rolled out. Maybe they were sick of seeing stuff like this.
It must be really incredible to be part of building, I mean, actually here, not just building houses, but building a community.
You're in there, just talk to us! Just talk to us!
Yeah. Starmer lost the unions over cutting the winter fuel payment for pensioners.
Friends, people simply do not understand. I do not understand how our new Labour government can cut the winter fuel allowance for pensioners and leave the super rich untouched.
Yeah, well, loads of backbench MPs now regret voting for that, don't they? The rumour is he's about to sack this guy.
2008, Barack Obama has been elected President of the United States. Usain Bolt is breaking records at the Beijing Olympics, and Batman is dominating at the box office. And I'm the Energy Secretary. Yes, like Batman, I've returned.
Not for long, mate, you're off. Anyway, he's going to row back on net zero, is he? Loads of Labour MPs supported Starmer's big green plans.
That's why today I'm so proud to launch our Green Prosperity Plan, a plan that will turn the UK into a green growth superpower. And driving the plan forward is a goal that will put us ahead of any major economy in the world. 100% clean power by 2030.
I'm Brian Badonde. Anyway, will they revolt over that? He's decided to slash foreign aid as well, despite saying this.
Cut is wrong because investing in 0.7% in international aid is in Britain's national interest. This has been a cross-party position for 20 years. Successive prime ministers have kept to the commitment. Every living prime minister thinks this is wrong. There's only one prime minister who's prepared to do this, and he's sitting there.
Oh, he's in office, he's done it, and of course he wants his MPs to back it now, doesn't he? Well, where does that leave this guy?
Let me be clear. The UK will not forget Sudan.
They forgot Sudan. And all the others who are obsessed with foreign aid, well, they're going to be screwed now, aren't they? They're said that there wouldn't be a national inquiry into grooming gangs.
Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas.
There we go. Then 4 Labour MPs revolted over that and said that they actually wanted a national inquiry. Look, you just look at all of that, all those little things that the Labour MPs have been revolting over, bit by bit by bit. And if the Chancellor goes ahead and slashes benefits by the billions, how long before those left-wing Labour luvvies start a monumental backbench revolt? Let's get thoughts on my panel this evening. We've got GBNews presenter, former Tory MP Miriam Cates, journalist and broadcaster Emma Trimble, and ex-Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser. Look, Miriam, I mean, by the way, bang in favour of us cutting the benefits from quite a few people, don't get me wrong, but my point is this: how long is it before Labour MPs start revolting, do you think?
Well, I think a few may vote against, a few may even lose the whip, but I don't think Starmer's in any trouble at all. I mean, he's got a massive majority. He's got serious control over the party, a lot more so than Conservative whips ever had over Conservatives. And I think he'll be quite happy to make an example of 2 or 3 and frighten the rest into not revolting. And I think from the MP's point of view, yes, they will have campaigned on these policies and it'll be very embarrassing for them to vote against cutting benefits. But under threat of losing the whip, under threat of being deselected, under threat of all the other kind of things that the whips can do to you, knowing that you can't make a difference, that's the thing. If they had the numbers to defeat Starmer, then it might be worth it. But if they're going to cut benefits, the Conservatives will vote for that. 20, 30, 40, 50 Labour rebels is not going to make any difference.
It's quite interesting, though, isn't it? Because what that appears to indicate is that those Labour MPs actually just don't have any principles.
Well, quite. I think Miriam's absolutely right, and you've read my mind there, Patrick, because I think, the assumption, if you thought they were going to revolt, the assumption would be that they're potentially more principled than they are. And I think many of them just go whichever way they think the wind is blowing. And in this case, the wind is blowing in the direction of practicality, because the reality is that in order for this Labour government to survive, if it, is going to get the economy under some kind of control, if it's going to at least answer, even in a superficial way, to the electorate, that they are going to now have to put aside their sixth form politics and actually start to, act where the rubber meets the road. And the reality is, we talk about U-turns, but it's more like they're stuck on the M25, just going round and round and round. So I think many of them are just along for the ride, and we'll just go with it.
Well, I think it's coming, Matthew. You look at all the different little bits, and today 40 rural Labour MPs over the farmers. They decided to finally grow a bit of a spine and say something, didn't they? We had the winter fuel payments to the 2-child benefit cap. Now, if she slashes benefits, even though a lot of people, by the way, think this is a good thing, those Labour MPs are going to have to look themselves in the mirror and look their constituents in the face, aren't they, and say, you voted for benefit cuts. It's like the least Labour thing ever.
Well, I think you need to look at what the so-called benefit cuts will be. So I don't think it's not slashing benefits in terms of the rate. So you saw the clip there from Keir where he was saying that benefits should rise in line with inflation. That will still happen. What it is it's tackling this worklessness crisis, which frankly has happened since the pandemic, where Britain now has, it's the only sort of major economy that has a lower percentage of people in work this far out of the end of the pandemic than it did before. Then there's this kind of sort of million people who've effectively got lost in the system, who've been signed off but may not be seriously ill. Nobody's going to be taking money away from seriously disabled people, etc., but who kind of at the moment are being written off, and we can't afford to write them off because it's bad for them, it's bad for the taxpayer, and it's bad for the economy. So that's what it's about. It's about getting people into work, and that's why Liz Kendall's going to have a plan.
Yeah, I think also it depends where you are in the electoral cycle, right? So now we're at the very beginning of it. I think things would be very different if Labour MPs were being faced with potentially losing their seats over this, particularly with things like the farmers, but also with benefits as well. Those who are maybe in red wall seats, although those in red wall seats probably tend actually to be quite sound on things like benefits and don't want people to be scrounging, but would equally think that it was right for people who do need benefits in order to have some kind of safety net there.
So some of the interesting things I think about this is the principles or lack thereof of actual cabinet ministers. So David Lammy, not going over foreign aid by the looks of things, even though you would imagine he would have kicked up a massive stink about all of that.
Saying lots of nice things about Donald Trump.
Saying lots of nice things about Donald Trump.
I thought you'd enjoy the sight of him squirming.
On the other hand, we criticise people when they don't change their minds in response to new evidence. And, you can say, well, all these Labour politicians were virtue signalling in the past, and yes, they probably were. But I'm much more relieved that actually when they're in government and they're seeing the reality, they are changing their minds. It'd be much worse if they weren't. And if Keir Starmer does sack Ed Miliband, he does row back from net zero, I'll be delighted. I think it's the same with the benefits. I think Matthew's right. I doubt that they'll reduce things like universal credit, for example. But what they ought to do is stop treating mental health and physical health the same. That's where we've gone wrong.
It's about using a political capital, though, Matthew, isn't it? And Keir Starmer's used up a heck of a lot of it. At the moment, he's getting a bit of a bounce because he keeps throwing his arms around Volodymyr Zelensky.
Quite right.
But Boris Johnson had to wait a couple of years before he needed the Zelensky bounce. He was in Ukraine every other day. They named a road after him, for goodness sake, right? But, Starmer's already leaning on Zelensky. He's full Ukraine at the moment. You can't dine out on that forever. And when actually the dust settles on all of that, and hopefully it does quite soon, he's asked all his MPs behind him to compromise a heck of a lot of their principles.
Look, I think that of the clips you saw there, the montage you saw there, the winter fuel allowance is the one that's been a killer for Labour MPs. Every Labour MP who knocks on doors, every Labour campaigner who knocks on a door gets in there. I had a friend saying they were knocking on doors on Sunday and they were getting it in Liverpool in about as Labour an area as you could get, saying that it was being mentioned time and time again. That's the one because everybody understands it and it's really clear. I don't think you're going to have doors slammed in your face if you're saying that we're going to take people who can work into work's actually going to be popular. So I think, yes, I don't think you're going to see a big rebellion on that. I think, Ed's future may be I think Ed's future is more in question than you're likely to see a big rebellion. There will be a handful of MPs who rebel. Zara Sultana, for example, still doesn't have the whip back. They've always been a small group of kind of hard left MPs, and they will, go like that at the very notion of doing anything. But I think that it won't be a big political issue.
I do think it's quite damaging for Keir Starmer generally, though, Emma, that he's been saying one thing for years, and like decades, really, and then he gets into office and he does something else. Now, I thought you made a great point, which is, well, I suppose if you ultimately do the right thing, then all right, it doesn't really matter so much. But I just think it's laughable. I think it's absolutely laughable that this guy was virtue signalling 4 years, leading a party full of virtue signallers, and then you get into office and it's just uni-party stuff, isn't it, Des?
I mean, the three of them, Starmer, Rachel Reeves and David Lammy, they've all done the same thing. I think that the way that they appear to the electorate obviously is going to be affected by this. I think we should wait and have a little look and see what happens during the May elections. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how the further left wing voters are taking all of this, because like you say, now that they're in government, they've said one thing, they've done another. It's not really a case of people changing their minds based on new evidence or having integrity. From the perspective of the people who are further to the left, they'll see this as a betrayal, but of course to the rest of the country actually it might take quite well.
I don't know, I think we underestimate just how rapidly things are changing right now. Obviously there's the international situation. If America withdraws as the Western guarantor, that's a massive change to the West. But also domestically, I mean, yes, benefits bills have been climbing for a long time, pension bills are, but actually, just since the pandemic, there's been a 40% increase in young men not in education, employment or training. Now, that is a huge change in 2 or 3 years. Now,
Totally.
I'm no Labour supporter, and I personally think the welfare state has become a millstone around our neck. We should completely reform it around family rather than worklessness. But having said that, I do think it's fair that actually Starmer and Reeves have got into the office and things have declined a lot faster than they thought they would.
And also, I think during the pandemic, things stayed the same to some degree for quite a long time.
Or were masked by everything else that was going on. Yeah.
Whereas now, what we're seeing, particularly with what's happening in the States, is that the government is going to have to be more reactive than we've seen in the last couple of years.
And I think, Labour would say that in the manifesto, yes, it said benefits would be, those who really need it would be looked after, but it did say that the clues in the title that getting people off welfare to work would be a priority.
I just think he's very vulnerable to one Guardian article that finds the one person who slipped through the net here. They send a camera crew around to the house of someone who's got severe.
There'll be some trouble at the conference,
and then exactly that, and then there you go. The thing is, I personally,
but it'll see it off.
I could be wrong about this. I personally think, though, no one who, I don't think anyone who voted Labour at the last election voted for this.
Hardly anyone did vote Labour. This is the problem. They've got an enormous majority on a tiny vote share, and I think all the Labour MPs will be very well aware of the polls that a lot of them are heading for defeat.
But nevertheless, so when's the revolt coming?
But you see, it doesn't work like that.
But I don't think that's what they're worried about.
Because, OK, I'll give you a personal example. I voted against my own party on a lot of these key issues that are now incredibly popular, like trans and sacking net zero.
Yeah.
But all you get for that is a lot of anger from your local party, a lot of anger from the whips. And when it comes to election time, voters say, thank you, Miriam, we love what you stand for, but we hate your party, we're voting reform. There is no win for MPs on this.
OK.
And I think, I've just been reading the Labour List, which is the kind of in-house journal for Labour members, that the anti-reform leaflet that Labour has issued and that local parties can buy from the online shop is just sold out. So they're more worried about reform than they're worried about the left in terms of the campaigners on the ground.
Turns out some people do have a bit of money going around. So there we go.